Hi, I'm your host, Blair Beattie, and welcome to the Invisible Ingredient, brought to you by Farmer's Footprint. It felt apt for us to spend a little bit of time so you can understand who we are and why we're here. And I'm sitting here in the studio right now with Dave Murphy, who's one of our amazing team members at Farmer's Footprint. Dave, welcome to the studio. I'm looking forward to this kind of precursor conversation before we dive into our first and esteemed guest, Dr. Zach Bush. So we'll take a few minutes just to unravel why we're here and what we're doing here. We're a not-for-profit organisation that spans from the US to Australia and New Zealand, and have this incredible team that has come around this topic for our audience today. We have people from the US. We have Mel in Austin, Texas. We have Briar Rose in New Zealand. We have Alana in Mexico, all members of our US organisation. And here in Australia, there's, of course, yourself, myself, obviously, and Elle, who have all been such incredible. We've just created this amazing amount of energy around this topic over a period of time now, and we're so honoured and pleased to bring this to life, to birth what we think is a really important conversation. And here we are. Welcome, Dave.
Yeah, good to be with you. And I think you're right that we've been spending a number of years now telling stories and giving voice to what we might call the regenerative farming movement. But there's not been a story that's been more resonant than this topic that we're going to be discussing today and in this podcast. And that is the topic of glyphosate and ultimately the broader topic of chemical use in farming. So yeah, excited to unpack it with you.
And it's actually how we came into this organisation as well. It was the seed that brought us here through some of the voices, maybe was it 4 or 5 years ago, we realised what's happening in the world. We realised the part that this ubiquitous chemical is actually playing, and we've now realised these beautiful organisations which are about awareness, about bringing people around these super important topics, and it feels great to be at this point now where we get to birth something really beautiful and invite people into what we feel is one of the most important conversations we can be having at this time on Earth.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because it's a conversation with our guest in this first episode, Dr. Zach Bush, that actually brought myself into this movement. I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, and I remember listening to a podcast episode with Zach and Rich Roll, and it was one of those moments where after I'd heard that episode, like what you learn, you can't unlearn. What you then know, once you start to dive deeper into this story, you can no longer unknow. And so it actually ultimately changed the trajectory of my career and ultimately life, because it's such an important topic. And what I think is quite unique about this topic of glyphosate is that, unfortunately, at this point, even if you're actively trying to avoid exposure to this chemical, you simply can't anymore. It's literally everywhere. It's so prevalent, obviously, in our food system, but so far beyond that now in our schools, on our highways and roadways, in our parks, in our waterways. It's a water soluble chemical, so it is literally, it's in our rainwater. And so I think, unfortunately, when you think about this chemical, or you think about it in reference to maybe other toxins, other environmental toxins that over the years that humans have been exposed to or potentially been exposed to, what's unique about this is that you can't avoid it. It's the one thing that we are all involuntarily exposed to. And because of that, we think it's just so important to be having a conversation about it and bringing awareness to it so people have a greater understanding of what the chemical is and what its potential impacts and harms are on both human and planetary well-being.
And so this is the birth of the invisible ingredient, which is such an apt name for this ubiquitous chemical that so many people don't know is in their daily lives. has seeped into everything that we do. And I think there's a sense of responsibility that we have in our organisation is to make that known so people can discern about their actions, the food that they eat, the places that they go, and we have this sense that something like this, where we bring some of these incredible people, from farmers to clinicians to researchers to legal minds, that have been ringing the bell. I think one of our guests says he's been ringing the bell on this topic for some time. We finally get to hold that conversation in a vessel, somewhere that people can use as an evergreen resource to share, not only for themselves, because once you understand this, once you embody this knowledge, it changes how you live on earth. And our hope is that it not only does that for individuals, but we get to share this, and this is a reservoir of some of the greatest minds around our story, around agrochemicals. Sorry, Dave.
No, I was just going to say, you touched on it, but this idea or concept of awareness precedes change, that is really the intent with, firstly, this podcast, and we'll talk about a broader campaign maybe in a moment. But the belief we hold as an organisation, and perhaps just a truth in life, is that we can't change until we become aware of what it is that, in this case, the issue or the problem. We first must become aware of it and have an understanding of it. And so that is what, as you just outlined, this podcast series is designed to do. It's designed to create a container to hold deep, wide-ranging conversations. And, we've called it the Invisible Ingredient, and we use a little tagline, I suppose, on this campaign, which is that glyphosate is everywhere. Let's talk about it. And that's what this is. It's an invitation to come into conversation about the topic. And there's obviously, as you'll hear if you do tune in to all these episodes, there's wide-ranging perspectives and a breadth of understanding that goes around it. And you may not resonate with everything that's said, you may not believe everything that's said, and there is probably ultimately not a single truth about this chemical and about this topic. But what we want to invite is people to come in and to listen and to learn, and then ultimately be empowered to start to make better, more informed decisions about initially, where their food comes from and how their food is grown, but ultimately to come into a better relationship with themselves, with nature, with community, with our farmers, with our agricultural system, with our food system. And so that's the invitation here. It's to, through these episodes, is to provide that information, that education, and ultimately that awareness. And the podcast is hopefully a holistic view at that. We certainly haven't covered every single aspect and angle, and maybe over time we'll get there, or at least we'll get further. But the podcast is also just the beginning of what is ultimately a much larger campaign, we'll call it, or initiative, to really bring awareness to this topic at a mass scale. We know that not everyone potentially has the time available to tune in to hour-plus long conversations, but we believe we've found a way to really cut through using social media and using what are now so many allies and associates in our network around the world who believe in this topic and believe in this movement and want to share the story. And we've created we're in the process of creating funding and ultimately production on a video series designed to bring awareness to it, a short form video series designed for social media to really just ultimately get people to stop and just in a few short seconds, just get them to stop and think and learn. And ultimately, hopefully that's the beginning, the starting point for them to go deeper. And that's why, as you said earlier, this podcast will sit there as an evergreen resource for those that do want to tune in to the specific topics and episodes on the specific aspects of glyphosate. Ultimately, it'll be accompanied by a website as well that is a deep dive resource into all the latest science. Again, these conversations will be there, the latest research, where people can really go deep and Yeah, our intention is really just to provide that one-stop shop for people to learn about this topic and, as we've said, start to be more informed and more empowered to make better decisions and to come into a closer relationship with their food and their food system.
It's so true that we don't change until we're actually aware of something. And the reality around this topic is that it's still not set, right? It's still there's this dichotomy of, and these stories that we got told and have been told for the last 50 years around, we can't feed the world without these kind of agrochemicals in our system. But what we're sensing and what we're seeing is the harm that's being caused by this monocropping and reliance on agrochemicals, and glyphosate being the one that is used far more than any other. Finally understanding the science, and we're realizing that we have what's at stake, right? We have planetary collapse right there. We're witnessing it. We can see what's happening in our internal biology and the external biology. For the individual and the collective are suffering, and so much of that suffering, we see this causative pathway to how we produce our food. So when we really grasp why do we need to know this information, it's more than just because we need to be healthier as individuals. We need to leave a planet that's in alignment and accordance with what we want for our children. It's an opportunity for us to come back into connection with our food. We don't just speak about the harm that this ubiquitous chemical is causing throughout our planet and throughout our internal systems. We speak to people that have been able to understand and then realise life beyond, whether that be in our farming systems or our school campuses. We already have a pathway beyond this, so we just need to bring people and invite people in to see that and realise that and embody that.
Yeah, and as you said, I think it is an opportunity, and in my experience, personally, but also with friends and family who I've shared this topic with over the years, when you're new to it, it's understandable how it can feel daunting and a little scary and quite depressing. And in some ways it is all those things, but it's also, as you said, an opportunity. And in my experience, as the more you learn about the food system and where your food comes from, the more opportunity there is to come into better relationship with that. And whether that's getting to know farmers at local farmers markets or understanding, what's more seasonal in terms of the food that you're eating. And ultimately, as you start to choose your food a little differently, you notice the impact and effect of that on your own health and your own biology. And you have the opportunity to step into a more vital state of being as a result of the choices you make. So we really do see this as ultimately, as scary as it can be, it's also a story of hope and opportunity. And our farmers sit at the middle of all of this. And one thing I'm sure you talk about, in fact, I know you talk about it in a couple of the episodes, but one thing this is definitely not is a blame game or a pointing fingers at the farmers. This is not a story that puts them as the enemy or as the culprits of this. This is a collective story that we are all a part of. And as you just touched on, it's about the story of convenience and expectation that we've ended up in as we'll call it consumers, particularly us city folk who are often far removed from ever even seeing any food be grown, let alone growing it ourselves. And so, this is absolutely the farmers are invited into this conversation as much as everyone else here. And you might speak to this in your journeys, speaking to so many farmers over the last couple of years. But what we've witnessed is farmers that do step into this conversation and do start to explore this pathway beyond chemical use in farming, or at least reducing chemical use in farming, they only, more often than not, it's just, I wish I'd found this out sooner. It's always a story of, oh my God, what a beautiful opportunity for change and growth. And so that's I guess ultimately the message here is that we are at a time, as you just touched on, we are at a time in society right now where the world is ready for change. The world is ready for new ways of being, for new systems. We're seeing it far beyond just the agricultural industry. We're seeing it in politics. We're seeing it in big industry, in business. We're seeing it in media. People are looking for new ways of being, new ways of doing, and new ways of engaging with each other, with community, and in this case with food. And it's almost, by the day, by the week now, we're just seeing more and more people being more and more open to this idea. And that's why we think the time for this conversation is now. And hopefully, if you tune in with us throughout the episode, you'll just hear that it's an incredible story. It's a heavy story at times, but it's an invitation and it's an opportunity.
So what's to come? I know there was one fella that you were really looking forward to tuning into, Dave.
Yeah, I mean all of them are fascinating, but the legal episode with Brent Wisner is mind blowing. I mean, that in itself is enough to. I mean, I'm already activated on this topic, but that one just sort of got the fire going again. It's an incredible conversation, but there are so many others. So many.
We spend the first 4 just sort of really unpacking this conversation, and it can be challenging at times, but it's meant to be challenging at times. And then the last few of the podcasts are very much about a way forward. I had the most stunning conversation with Dr. Jessica Hutchins, who speaks about an Indigenous perspective around chemicals in our food. It was heart-opening, eye-opening, and so profound when we look at what do we need to do in the future. Just putting or seeing through that lens is revelatory in itself. So it's so much diversity, so much heart. These people not just talk about this, but they live this, and it feels just so right to bring them together in a vessel to share with you guys what's possible when we do come together. I'll take this quick opportunity to just say how deeply honoured I am to sit with this incredible team and birth this profound story around glyphosate. We come together with some skills, this diverse array of skill sets, and we've been able to deliver this conversation for our time. So this is an invitation for you to join us on this journey of discovery, because glyphosate is everywhere. So let's talk about it. Welcome to the Invisible Ingredient, brought to you by Farmer's Footprint. Here we name a sobering truth. Glyphosate is everywhere. It's in the fields we grow our food, in the rain that falls in our rivers, even in the breast milk of mothers. It is quite literally inside us. So let's talk about it. Glyphosate is the most widely used herbicide in human history. Sold as a tool for killing weeds, it now saturates our soils, flows through our supply chains into our lunchboxes and dinner plates, and has become part of the invisible fabric of daily life. Today we begin with Dr. Zach Bush, a triple board certified physician, educator, and one of the most visionary voices on the intersection of soil health, human health, and planetary flourishing. Zach has spent years tracing this thread between our microbiome, our ecosystems, and the chemical that has become to define our modern agriculture, glyphosate. In this conversation, we examine the disruption across Earth's living systems and how it correlates with the rise of chronic disease. We'll consider the soil crisis and our loss of biosis, and we'll explore the choices available to reconnect our biology and craft pathways towards healing. This is an invitation to see our place within the web that feeds us and to ask how we might move together toward being more fully human again. It's nice to see you, and how are you?
It's a real thrill to be with you, Blair. I'm always glad to be connected to this Aussie, and it's a real blessing to be part of a global community that's starting to consider the possibility that we can change directions. And I think that's really where I get excited about this glyphosate story that we're going to dive into. Is, boy, it gives us such an incredible opportunity. When we see the depth of the injuries that we've created, it gives us such an opportunity to pick a different direction for humanity. So I'm really pleased to be with you and excited to see what we unpack here.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I think as a starting point, it'd be great to begin with your story. Like, you've trained in conventional medicine, oncology, endocrinology, hospice care. What I'm interested is what awakened you to dive a little bit deeper into soil, into farming, and ultimately this chemical glyphosate.
Yeah. So the journey for me was a very winding road, I suppose, as it is for all of us in a life that we can't write prospectively. But the journey for me was really started in the miracle of life. I was heading into engineering and then took a hard left turn into medicine when I happened to have the opportunity to live in the Philippines for 6 months and birth babies with a group of international midwives. And being at that front end of the miracle of life, watching these incredibly perfectly formed infants coming out of women who were in abject poverty and different degrees of starvation, birthing these perfect babies was just such an awe-inspiring moment that took me into a place where I just couldn't unsee what I had seen. And that miracle of life is really what drew me in ultimately. So from the miracle of life, we then kind of took me in a winding path into medicine. I didn't have any doctors in my family, didn't know what I was getting myself into really. And so it was kind of one surprise after another in some ways, and thought I'd go into family medicine, ended up in internal medicine, which was, a lot more hospital based and ICU care than I could have imagined when I began. And it was in those intensive care units where I started to really be able to witness, the mechanisms of life in these really intense situations in which you're almost, trying to micro control every single organ system in a body. You've taken over kidneys and liver and uh, heart, and despite all the technology that we have, what you get humbled by as a physician in these environments is just the spectacular function of a human body. And none of our technologies can even come close to competing with a human heart or with human kidneys and the magic they do every day. These organs are doing literally miraculous work in the biophysics, biochemical, biologic mysteries of life. And we have no technology that's come even close to competing with a single human cell, let alone an organ, let alone the symphony of an organ system that would create life within a human being. So that was a bit of my journey into like wonderment, I would say, starting at birth and then moving into, end of life, extreme, critical care environments. And that got me more and more interested about kind of more of a root cause analysis of how do bodies work to create health rather than all of this disease that I was managing in the ICUs, recognizing the limitations of technology. We can't actually create a healthy humanity through an ICU technology. At best, we can prolong suffering in some ways. That's about as best we do. And so I was curious to get upstream of that. So I went into endocrinology and metabolism as a specialty, and that got me into mitochondria. And mitochondria is the microbiome inside of human cells. These are small bacteria that live inside of human cells. They're specialized to release energy and create the communication network by which human cells function. And so these little bacteria are non-human. They've got their own little bacterial genome. They proliferate inside of our cells just like bacteria would inside of the soil system in your garden. And so I was studying these mitochondria, and that got me into a really unique look at cancer. And so I started doing cancer research and drug development around chemotherapy, 2005 to 2010 timeframe. And I was able to look at cancer through a completely different lens than all of the conventional oncology and drug development was doing, which is always looking at it through pathways of inflammation, pathways of cell damage, pathways of. Instead, I was looking at it through this angle of energy and energetic systems, and that gave me a really powerful opportunity to see something that had been seen about 100 years before by a guy named Otto Warburg, that I didn't know of at the time because he's not taught in our traditional Western medicine philosophy anymore. But He was an extraordinary scientist and doctor in about 100 years back, and he had also witnessed under the initial light microscopes that were just starting to get strong enough to see mitochondria. He was seeing that there was changes in those mitochondria before the cancer cell would develop. And so he was looking upstream of cancer at energy and energy production. And that's where I found myself 100 years later looking at microscopes and becoming really excited that there was a wound that was predicting the cancer behavior of the human cell. And that wound was non-human. It was in this microbial environment. And so that is when I started trying to nourish cells into more energy production, recognizing cancer cells are in very low energy states. And that's why they suck energy out of their surrounding environment so they can no longer produce their own energy. And so the reason why you have wasting in a cancer patient, only 0.1% of the cells in their body actually have cancer or expressing cancer, but it sucks the life out of the entire organism because those cancer cells are so energy demanding and they can't produce their own energy. So this got me excited about producing the production of energy, and so we started nourishing cancer cells with vitamin A compounds and other nutrients, and got to watch cancer cells eliminating themselves. So instead of poisoning cancer with chemotherapy as a poison, using nourishment as a tool became a really exciting new pathway. That was my slippery slope into food systems, realizing that food was lacking a lot of these nourishing compounds that could eliminate cancer, and it was starting to make sense as to how we suddenly had this cancer epidemic in the late 1990s and early 2000s that seemingly come out of nowhere. Nobody predicted that we could have that fast of a rise in cancer. It didn't fit any of our cancer models that you could have an epidemic of cancer. And yet we were watching epidemics of cancer, and these are massive epidemics. Like worldwide now, we have a 10 times increase, 10x increase in many different types of cancers in a short period of time, 10, 15-year period. And so that's affecting, the United States as kind of the first country to fully express that wound by the late 1990s, early 2000s. But now I'm working over in Saudi Arabia, which is one of the more recent countries to adopt Western food systems, and their cancer rates have matched ours instantly. Like within 5-year period of eating Western diet, they're seeing those same disease rates emerge. And so it's a very fascinating look at when you fail to nourish the microbiome within the human cell, you quickly will develop a cancer epidemic. And so that was my energetic emergence into the concept of nourishment. Started a clinic in 2010 called Revolution Health Center, and we were determined to figure out a nutrition plan to reverse chronic disease. And that took us deep into nutrition science to find out that there's almost none. There's very, very little nutrition science in our Western allopathic world. And so that forced me deeper back in history and ultimately into Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic. Now, Chinese medicine is largely herbal. Ayurvedic is more kind of global nutritional, also a lot of herbal remedy in the food itself. And so it was Ayurvedic nutrition that really kind of broke my clinic into its success path. And in that, we realized that the food that we were feeding our patients was somehow 30% of the time creating more problems, not less. And as we drilled into that 30% of what was the disease or what was the mechanism of action of the food that was causing harm, that's when we found glyphosate. And so that was my long 30-year journey to find a single molecule. And now my laboratory's been studying glyphosate for the last 15 years. And I think we have one of the preeminent databases of information as to exactly how glyphosate creates this environment for chronic disease, including cancers, to emerge and all of this.
Wow. I guess what might be interesting for listeners that are new to this topic, of which there are many, as we both know. I'm interested to you to unpack and share. Well, what is this ubiquitous chemical? What is glyphosate as far as you understand it, and how did we get to this point where it's the most widely used pesticide 10 times the most widely used pesticide worldwide at this point in time?
Yeah, the volume is spectacular. We're at about 4 billion pounds a year, over 2 billion kilograms of a single toxin used globally into our soil systems, which is It's further disaster because it's water soluble. So this is a water soluble toxin that is in the family that we would call an organophosphate. And so salt is something that we think of as like table salt. Sodium chloride is the famous salt. But in biochemistry, a salt is basically any combination of a positive and negative charged compound that then develop these kind of subtle relationships between a positive charged sodium and a negative charged chloride, for example. In the case of the organophosphates, you're looking at the charge between a phosphate and carbon-oxygen combination. And these organophosphates were developed in the 1950s as kind of a new breakout of chemical families that would be used in a variety of ways. And the most famous one in the 1950s would become known as Agent Orange, a chemical warfare agent that was a defoliant. And so you spray this organophosphate on anything green and it was dead in a matter of hours. And so we were spraying this organophosphate of Agent Orange into Cambodia and North Vietnam and all along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We turned one of the most verdant, glorious rainforests of the world into a complete moonscape. Killed every animal, killed every single tree. It was literally just gray dust for 1,000-kilometer area there where we had decimated that jungle to try to reveal the Ho Chi Minh Trail and try to look for the Viet Cong and all this. And so it was this chemical warfare agent, and we were recognizing by the end of the Vietnam-American conflict, we realized that it was causing great harm in the peoples that were exposed, both at a horrific level in the Cambodian people and in the Vietnamese, as well as in American soldiers and the like that were being exposed to Agent Orange. And so they were developing not just, eventually cancers, but the horrible skin conditions, immune dysfunction, a whole range of things. And so we were witnessing the toxicity of it. And so by 1973, when Vietnam's wrapping up, the company that was producing that organophosphate was a chemical warfare company known as Monsanto. And Monsanto then, losing its main industry with the end of the war, started to look for other roles for their organophosphates. And they picked up an old patent from 1958 that they would purchase and then turn that into a new brand molecule that would be known as Roundup, but the chemical structure known as glyphosate is a very close cousin to Agent Orange. And these organophosphates are very potent, just as we saw with Agent Orange, at killing anything green. And so they became very potent disruptors of biology and therefore very effective weed killers. And so you spray this on any weed and it's dead within a matter of hours, can't reproduce, it wipes out the root system. It quickly became the most effective herbicide that had ever been rolled out on the market. And at the time, it was going to replace things like atrazine and some of these more toxic chemicals that were being used in the Green Revolution of the 1950s and 60s. The Green Revolution was a description of the new age of chemical farming, chemical agriculture that developed post-World War II. And so it was really between the wars, World War II and Vietnam, that we started developing, a chemical input model where we would kill everything and then put chemical fertilizers in the form of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or NPK fertilizers from fossil fuel into the soils to try to create this boom of green. And it was pretty convincing. The whole Midwest was just coming out of the Dust Bowl, which had been a destruction of topsoils from overplowing and monoculture cropping that had destroyed the soils of North America in a short period of time, just 100 years of that overplowing and failure to compost, failure to leave recovery times for the fields, and all of this had decimated the growing capacity, and Americans were starving. It's hard for Americans to wrap their heads around this, but we had literal mass starvation happening throughout much of the country by the 1930s and 40s, and so World War II was happening on the tail end of mass collapse of our food system. And so the Green Revolution seemed like a boon. And these chemicals came along to kind of bail us out of an already desperate situation of a collapse of topsoil. And so suddenly pouring NPK fertilizer in suddenly made things grow green that couldn't grow before. And what we didn't realize at the time is what we were doing is forcing the plants through all this nitrogen to mine deeper for carbon. And so the soils were already depleted in carbon. Carbon is the necessary fuel for life, and nitrogen is the foot on the accelerator pedal. And so the fuel in the gas tank is carbon, the accelerator pedal is nitrogen. And so we just slammed the accelerator pedal down and started sucking deeper and deeper reservoirs of carbon out of the ground with all this NPK fertilizer. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium is obviously lacking carbon. So what we were doing was deeply, mining the world of carbon reservoirs and putting that, up into the air through the organification of that carbon. So at the end of the growing season, all that carbon would end up in the atmosphere as the plants, rot at the end of or compost at the end of the season. And so we have been dredging the depths of the carbon soils to the point now where we are 97% of soils on the earth that are farmable are either depleted or severely depleted of carbon resources and other nutrients. And so NPK fertilizer came in and it looked good for the moment because it was giving us access to resources that were even deeper and previously not accessible. And only to find out we were mining nature deeper of her resources and destroying her deeper and creating a deeper wound than the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. So that's kind of where glyphosate stepped in. And so when you have a low carbon reservoir, low energy state of plants, they can grow fast, they look good, but they have low immune function. And so with a low immune function and low carbon communication network within the soil systems, plants were starting to be really prone to invasive weeds and pests, insects and all of this. So there was this growing demand every single year that we were mining and depleting carbon deeper. There was this growing demand for more herbicides and pesticides. Atrazine was only working so well, and the other 10 chemicals on the market at the time. So glyphosate came in and was just like a holy of holies. And it was so important for farmers at the time because in the 1970s, we're now 2 generations out from the post-World War II GI Bill in the United States. And with that GI Bill, we had lost all of our farming kids. And so farm kids came back from World War II and were told, hey, we'll send you to college for free. We'll get you off the farm. We'll give you education in finance and business and ultimately in computers and tech. And so we were stripping the Midwest of human resources and by moving their children into big cities and get their big education and never come home. And so we were in a severe labor shortage by the 1970s on farms across America. And so this new chemical coming in was a relief because a single farmer managing a few hundred acres wasn't keeping up. This chemical and chemical fertilizers was allowing farmers to move from 300 acres to 3,000 acres of management because they could just sit in a tractor all day long, spray massive amounts of chemicals and see success. And so it was really the convenience of the chemical coupled with the lack of labor at the beginning of the process that really set us up for this codependence on the chemical industry. I think that's important to all know because too often farmers are getting blamed for this situation. When in fact, there's been a social phenomenon, a social evolution that's led to this pattern of behavior and this codependence with the chemical industry. So to answer your question, organophosphate is a salt that is put into the system that disrupts biology at a very fundamental level of the shikimate pathway. This is an enzyme pathway that is responsible for producing 3 of the most critical amino acids in biology. And so this is maybe similar to an alphabet, if you can think of it that way. So there's about 400,000 different proteins in the human body. There's about 400,000 different English words. We have an alphabet of 26 letters that will produce those 400,000 words in the English language. Australians have their own language, which is a little bit more complicated, but
Yes, we do.
Or maybe it's simpler, actually. Maybe it's just you guys have figured
Just
out
put a Y on the end of everything.
that critical Y. And so that Y is actually a very good example. So the Y is that weird vowel, right? A-E-I-O-U and sometimes Y. And so that Y is one of the vowels. And so of the 26 English, alphabet, you've got 5 or 6 vowels in there. And that vowel is critical compared to some of the other consonants, because if you start removing vowels from the alphabet, you start misspelling every word. The vowels in the protein world are what we call essential amino acids. And so there's 22 amino acids, not 26 letters, but 22 amino acids that build the 400,000 proteins. And so those 400,000 proteins that are made are really developed from just a very limited alphabet of amino acids that will build all those proteins. Of that 22 amino acids, you've got 9 that are considered essential amino acids, which are critical to every single protein out there. Of those 9, there's the subset made by the shikimate pathway, which are these special carbon ring structures called the aromatic amino acids. And so these are alanine, phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan, are examples in this category here. And so this one enzyme pathway is making 3 of the critical vowels in the alphabet. And so you can imagine what happens when glyphosate comes along and suddenly erases 3 of the vowels in the daily necessity of building proteins so that cells can survive. Cells have to regenerate their protein structures every millionth of a second. You're constantly updating protein structure. So when you suddenly start misspelling 400,000 proteins, the cell dies very quickly. And so that's what ultimately glyphosate is. It's a potent toxin that disrupts the building blocks of life at the level of proteins and amino acids. And then there's further toxicity that we can talk about subsequently, but that's the essential kind of initial patent that came out on glyphosate in 1958 and then got purchased and popularized by Monsanto in the 1970s. This is a salt that gets poured into water systems, soil systems, that disrupts life, the level of building blocks of life.
So it's moved from a weed killer into being present in all of our food, our waterways, the air that we breathe. What happens to our physiology when that enters the human body? What have you learnt about its effects on gut microbiome, immunity, and so forth? There seems to be a suite of byproducts of and effects that we have of ingesting this in human biology.
So to hit on the fact that it kind of got added to our food and water and rain and everything else, what's happened is that this water-soluble toxin started getting into our water system in the 1980s, and we saw a very quick consequence to human biology. In a word, it's metabolism. And so step 1 is you disrupt protein synthesis. That happens within a matter of seconds. But then within a matter of minutes, you start to undermine mitochondria. And so again, these are the bacteria that live inside your cells. So we now know that organophosphates are probably one of the most potent antibiotics on the planet. And so glyphosate is killing the bacteria inside of soil. It's killing the bacteria within plant systems, and then we ingest it through water and food. And we end up with these residues of antibiotics that kill the gut microbiome within our body and the mitochondria inside our cells. So an antibiotic is true to its definition of the term. So biosis is a word that refers to the relationships necessary for life to occur. If you look up the definition, it refers to the relationships necessary for life to occur. Antibiosis or antibiotic means that you're against the relationships that make life possible. And that's exactly what happens when you take an antibiotic. You are wiping out the collective, cooperative, synergistic workforce of bacteria and mitochondria that make a single human cell capable of being alive. And so at a high level, you're just completely wiping out the entire workforce of the human body when you're exposed to glyphosate. In the 1980s, this was relatively low dose. And so we were starting to see obesity emerge and type 2 diabetes by the end of the decade. So those were our early signs that, we had really screwed up our relationship to energy. Our cells could no longer burn the energy we were eating. We were eating the same calories in 1978 as we were in 1982, but suddenly those same calories were causing obesity because the cells could no longer burn that fat or sugar. And so sugar and fat had to be sent back to the liver to be stored as fat. And so there was a sudden collapse in productivity or usage of the supply chain of calories in the human body. leading to obesity. As soon as you get fatty liver, you end up with insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and all the downstream consequences of insulin resistance and inflammation. So that was the 1980s. Then along comes the early 1990s, and farmers start to discover that they can use glyphosate in new ways. And it was, I'm in northern UK right now, very close to Ireland, and it was right here in Ireland that the first farmer tried this trick. And so he had a wheat field that was matured and was ready to harvest, but winter was going to arrive a couple weeks early, and he couldn't harvest the wheat because it wasn't dry yet. If you harvest wheat too early before it's completely dry, it gets moldy immediately. And so if you got to wait until there's complete dryness, you got to get that humidity down to like 6 or 8% before you're ready to harvest it. And he was about to lose his entire crop of the season, which means he was going to lose his farm. And so in desperation, he started, as all farmers are the best problem solvers that I've ever met, he came up with this idea that he could spray the wheat field with the glyphosate that he had in the barn, because he had seen how fast the weeds would dry up underneath a glyphosate treatment. So he literally just went out in the field with his sprayer truck and sprayed his entire wheat field with glyphosate. And the next day, that stuff was dry as a chip, and he had successfully, 3 days later, harvested this thing before the weather moved in. So that was 1991. Within a year, farmers all over the world had heard of that success and started using it that way. And Monsanto, recognizing a new market, relabeled this weed killer as a desiccate. And so it started being used as a crop treatment on wheat at the end of the growing season. So imagine now your wheat being sprayed with a chemical that gets integrated into the plant moments before it's harvested and goes into the flour that ends up in your bread. By 1993, we have a new condition called gluten sensitivity. And within a year or two of that, we realized we have these autoimmune conditions going crazy called celiac disease, which is the autoimmune disease caused by gluten exposure. That had never occurred in human history until we started spraying wheat directly with glyphosate. And so this is not gluten sensitivity that's now affecting 1 in 3 people globally. It's glyphosate poisoning. And so that was when we started to see this emergence of much higher concentrations in our food system with much deeper consequences in human biology. By 1995, we had genetically modified squash was the first crop that was commercialized as Roundup ready. And so they had hybridized plants and with a plant that had been witnessed to be resistant to Roundup in one of the laboratories at Monsanto. And it was just one of the line workers working there that had made this recognition, and they grabbed that plant and started hybridizing that into different plant species, so that by 1996 we had squash, corn, soybean, and a half a dozen other crops that had been able to adopt this new gene that made it immune to the spraying of glyphosate, which meant that now the crop could be sprayed throughout its lifespan. Before the 1990s, you had to keep the glyphosate away from the crop or it would kill it. Suddenly, we found out we could dry crops at the end, which would be the wheat, the soybean, the lentil. Any legumes have to be dry before they're harvested. And so we were spraying it as a drying agent. And then by 1996, we were spraying in plants throughout their lifespan because they could now resist the damage done by the chemical. So by the late 1990s, every bite of food and every drop of water is starting to carry this glyphosate molecule. It's water soluble, so as soon as it gets sprayed on a plant, it gets taken up into the water structure inside the cells. And so you eat a piece of corn, and you think, well, I'll just wash the glyphosate off the surface. No, it's inside the freaking plant. It's inside every cell in that plant. Same thing with the water running off the farm. And so the water, it rains, or you irrigate the farm a day after spraying, and then you come and test, oh, see, all the glyphosate's gone, it's safe. No problem. Well, that glyphosate is not gone. That glyphosate simply moved from the farm into the river system. From there, it's evaporating in the atmosphere where it ends up in the clouds, and then it eventually ends up, the river at the end into the ocean. So now you're poisoning coral reefs and the entire, beach systems with glyphosate residues. Couple that with nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and now you have algae blooms that go from the Gulf of Mexico, where the Mississippi drains, all the way to the coast of Africa. Single algae blooms being produced by this toxic milieu of glyphosate and nitrogen, phosphate, potassium runoff from our farms in North America. That Mississippi River collects about 80% of the spraying done in our country and dumps it into the Gulf of Mexico. It has created a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. There's a dead zone in the ocean now that's larger than the state of Rhode Island. That dead zone is surrounded by a threatened zone that's larger than the state of Texas. There is not a single fish in the dead zone. Nothing can survive there. The only thing surviving in the dead zone is algae. And then there's the threatened zone where there are no fish, but there's a few, other plant species that are trying to fight through for survival. But we've put hundreds of millions of dollars of fisheries out of business and throughout the Gulf in this dead zone. And now we're putting fisheries out of business on the Ivory Coast, on the west coast of Africa, as that algae bloom and toxicity goes all the way across the Atlantic Ocean and is poisoning the coast of Africa. And so the wound that we've created is quite massive when it comes to just the scale of everything. So that's a little bit of kind of how we got here, I think. How did we get to 4 billion pounds? We've created the most convenient, weed killer and crop treatment in history. And with this continued collapse of, economy and workforce on farms, scale became the only solution for survival. And these chemicals made it possible to scale farms to these ridiculous scales.
What have we done? I mean, we often think of glyphosate as an agricultural issue, but you've actually described it one as a societal one. Like, do you see glyphosate as somewhat of maybe it's a metaphor, even possibly a teacher, showing us something about our disconnection? I'd love for you to wrap a little around that, because it makes so much sense to me, and I'm sure our audience's ears will prick when you unpack this one, buddy.
Yeah, I think it is well said as a metaphor. I think, glyphosate's interesting in that, it shows us something of the addiction behavior of humans. We have a wound that predates all other human, behaviors, perhaps, and that's this wound of abandonment. We deeply believe we are abandoned by nature, and that we are somehow against her and she's against us. And so we do this in every behavior. Right now, I'm sitting in a stone building that was erected about 300 years ago. This property has been in this family for 32 generations. Over 1,300 years, this property in the northern UK has been in the same family. And in that 1,300 years, this family has built more and more robust structures to try to get nature out of their lives. And so it's pouring rain outside right now. There's wind blowing. It's uncomfortable out there. And so that uncomfortableness, we've built an entire civilization that's in pursuit of comfort and convenience. And in that comfort and convenience, and the belief that nature is uncomfortable and against us, and therefore we need to get more and more sterile environments, we've created this phenomenon of chronic disease within the human mind. I think it's most obvious right now if you look across what's happening in the United States right now, politically, socially, industrial patterns, economic collapse. The whole thing is showing us the dis-ease of convenience, sterility, and that separation from nature ultimately. And so glyphosate is, a harbinger of our future in the sense that when we believe that we can get away with killing nature at all of its fundamental levels and have no harm to us, we've completely lost track of the fact that humans are of nature, and nature has imagined us into reality through her collective, creative, innovative, iterative process that is life on Earth. And so we've got this extraordinary thing that we call human, and we are the most complex ecosystem on the planet. And so we can think of rainforests and coral reefs and all these spectacular examples of complex biomes that are interacting to create this magnificent beauty and density of life on Earth. And then we find out that the human is 10x that level of biodiversity inside of a human body. We literally hold the most complex ecosystem on Earth in a healthy human body. If you look at the colon of any other mammal, we're more complex. We have more life within us. And so the thing that makes a human human is its unique capacity to carry massive amounts of complex, biodiverse, interconnected, co-creative, synergistic life. And so that's what it means to be human. That's biosis. Biosis is a word in reference to the relationships that make life possible. The more connections, the more biodiversity, the more intelligence comes out of the system, the more beauty comes out of the system, the more consciousness to the knowledge field of the entire universe emerges. And so we have perhaps accidentally been formed as this incredible vehicle of life, this vehicle of complex ecosystems. And so glyphosate has demonstrated to us, ultimately given us the science of what it looks like to undermine the nature within humanity and around us. And now we know that we cannot have human life that lives on some sort of life force separate from the soil. The soil is integral to the human experience, to the human expression of life. And so it's not surprising that as we have sterilized our soils to the point that there is no fertility left in these farm fields, and so now you have them all on intensive care unit type care. In the ICU, I've got patients on artificial nutrition. We've got tubes down their nose and we're feeding their gut. And when their gut completely fails, we put giant IVs in their arms and we feed them nutrients into their veins because their gut's gone, because we gave them too many antibiotics. And so the farm fields are in the exact same situation. We've so poisoned her lungs and gut that are those soil systems that we're now injecting, false nutrition and artificial nutrients into her to try to create a little bit of crop residue left to call it food, which is all inedible because it's actually not good. So then we have to process it with a bunch of sugar and other oils to make it tolerable to the palate. And now we call that the processed food industry, which is now selling more volume into the food system than produce is. And so we have this disgusting volume of processed foods necessary because of the depleted taste and flavor and nutrient profiles that we have in our food system now. So that's what we did to our soil system, and it's not surprising that fertility has followed. I'm working with the Saudi government right now, and they're facing a 68% infertility rate in their women seeking care now in their gynecologic environment. 68% of women infertile in a society predicts a very rapid disappearance of your peoples. That sounds really horrible until you find out that Saudi Arabia is worse off than the United States and 110 other countries. 110 countries are now below the extinction rate of birth rates globally. And so we cannot reproduce humans because of the sterility of our soil and food systems that we have created through our chemical addiction. And ultimately, that addiction is the symptom in medicine. If you go into psychiatry or anything else, you'll learn that addiction is the symptom of abandonment disorder as a child. And so this is humanity abandoned in our infancy, in our mind, from the nature that we actually represent. And then in that abandonment, we became addicted to everything. We're addicted to the chemicals of our environment. We're addicted to the social behaviors. We're addicted to our relationships. We're addicted to our jobs. We're addicted to our cars. We're addicted to everything. And if we start to really back up and start to heal this abandonment disorder from nature and start to realize we are her most magnificent, expression on this planet so far. And if we want to stay and play into the next magnificent expression of nature, we're going to have to start to embrace this nature within us and around us. And we're going to have to stop poisoning her. We're going to have to stop the poisoning, and we're going to have to really start to nurture life again. And fortunately, farmers all over the world have already made this transition and are doing the right thing by the soil, by the plant life and the biodiversity within their little biosphere. And these farmers are the hardest working, most unsupported group of humans on the planet. And so we need to rush out there and support every farmer, chemical farmers, biodynamic, every farmer needs your support immediately. We are losing in the United States alone 6,000 to 8,000 farms per year. 6,000 to 8,000 family farms are going out of business every year now. And so we have to rush out into our farm fields again around the world and start to support our farmers with economics that make sense to them, that de-risks the change from chemical dependence and addiction to good soil management. They need financial support during that transition. They need consumer support. They need a new relationship back to restaurants and groceries and farm stands and everything else. We got to get them reconnected. We got to stop this concept of consumerism. Nobody can be a consumer anymore. That's how we become the cancer on the planet. We need to all become producers. We need to leave behind the consumer behavior, and everybody needs to become productive. That doesn't mean everybody has to be a farmer. Everybody needs to know a farmer, and everybody needs to support that farmer with a direct relationship so that those farmers can start to make money again. In the 1960s, the farmers were making about 60 cents on every dollar spent by a family buying food. Today, that farmer's making 13 cents on the dollar. And so that's why the farms are going out of business, is we put so many middlemen between the household and the farm that the farms can't make money anymore, and the household is now being poisoned rather than nourished. And so we've got to rebuild relationship, and that's biosis, in reference to the relationships that make life possible. We want to reverse out of this, we're going to have to start to know each other again, and we're going to have to start to build villages again. Every place where we have sprayed glyphosate as a primary crop input, we have created ghost towns. Literally 1,200 miles of ghost towns in the United States that are boarded up. There's no retail, there's no grocery stores, there's no bars, restaurants. And the last 5 years, in fact, it was while we were filming the documentary Farmer's Footprint in the United States, that those little towns were boarding up their post offices. Those farm families now out there in 3,000, 5,000 acre farms have to drive for 2.5 hours to get their mail, to get their groceries, and everything else. And they're going hungry. Kansas is our most agricultural state in the United States. And 1 in 5 children in Kansas will go to sleep tonight hungry due to a lack of calories. They are literally starving in the middle of Kansas, in the middle of the largest farm fields in the world, because they stopped growing food. In their poison addiction, they've only created crops that are safe to go into gas tanks as ethanol rather than go into food, because the food's too toxic to go into humans. And so our farm fields are turning into production factories for gasoline additives rather than food additives, because things have gotten so toxic. And that Mississippi River system, it's too toxic to touch much of it. Even up on the headwaters region of this, like up in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Indiana, the numbers I just saw in Indiana are startling. It was 60% of rivers and reservoirs are now considered unsafe for recreation. None of them are safe for potable water, but it's not even safe to go jet skiing or water skiing on these lakes. And so they're recommending no swimming, no touching the water in 60% of the lakes, rivers, and reservoirs of Indiana. And so this is the level of toxicity we've reached now, is that our farm families are not only, receiving the highest amounts of poison because they're, right in the middle of all the spraying, they're also in the most nutrient deficient, deserts of nutrition in the world. So this is what we've created, and we have one opportunity to back out of this, and it's going to be through relationship. And that's what you've been doing, Blair, all over Australia, is you and your family got in that camper, and you guys started driving all over Australia to connect with farmers. And there's no greater mission right now than to find these families, give them respect, give them honor. I don't care if they're spraying glyphosate, not spraying glyphosate, they need our respect. They are on the front lines of something we all created together. We created an economic structure, political structure, social structure, consumer structure that created the traps they have been caught in, and they cannot get out of those alone. We cannot tell farmers to go do the right thing. We have to be part of that solution, and we all need to come together and create that. So let me turn that over to you, Blair. I would love for you to give a few minutes of reflection on what you've seen out there in the farm fields of Australia and what these farm families are showing.
Yeah, it's to speak to a given Australian context, and I think we can speak to like a colonial context somewhat, where conventional ag has been the predominant way of producing food. I spent 2 years traversing the country here, which is a bloody big country, and visiting farming communities, sitting across on generational farm tables to have these conversations, to understand and get a real sense and a pulse of where are we at, how did we get here, and how can we illuminate a pathway for these incredible people that toil every day and feed us, but think actually that we're against them. I can bring that up in it was the most incredible T-shirt that I've ever witnessed someone wear was a farmer in far Western Australia, and on the back of it, it said, "I'm a farmer. I'm not trying to kill you." That is the sense of what farmers think the rest of the populace considered them. And it was a really eye-opening moment for me to integrate into what I'm doing and understanding what the sensibility of these farmers that are putting food on our tables. And it really humbled my appreciation for what they do, but also was an incredible eye-opener on who they think they are. And it was a real war cry for me to bring people into a new perspective and a new understanding of who these people are and what's possible. Because I think the science can sound really overwhelming, our predicament can sound really overwhelming, but what I really got the sense of that time spent around Australia was a sense of hope. That our bodies, that our landscapes, our landscape function has this extraordinary capacity to heal. And if we come back into reconnection with ourselves, our landscapes, our animals, then we can realize that potential. And I think that's what I walked away with, was what's truly possible when we do all of that. And I'm interested in maybe unpacking a little bit what do you think we need to do? What families need to do to start to realize that healing potential that we all carry, that the planet carries, because I think that's where a lot of our attention and our energy could be diverted toward. The passing judgment on who's doing what, and it needs to be kicked to the curb. The dogma needs to be kicked to the curb somewhat. We need to come back and really just sit within ourselves, because there's a gnosis, I think, as well, that we carry of what we can do and who we can be. And our food system is a reflection and a mirror of that. I spent so much time on farmlands that I realized that the connection between a farmer and their landscape is almost a mirror.
Yeah.
And if I met a healthy, vibrant farmer, they stewarded a healthy, vibrant landscape. So and they weren't always that way. So the potential to shift and change is there. It's within us. So Zach, I'd love you to, as we sort of bring our conversation to somewhat of a close, is just to open up around at that capacity to heal. What is the pathway that's available to us to come back into some sort of harmony with how we produce food, with our relationship to our landscapes, and ultimately leaving a more beautiful, prosperous, and abundant world for generations to come?
In a word, it's relationship. Exactly. That's what we need. That's where we begin. And that relationship for a farmer today, I would encourage a twofold approach. Number one, I would reach out to nature itself and begin a new trust relationship. Start to rebuild trust with the land that you steward. And you're going to find out she is made of a nature that is inherently abundant. And it is interconnected, and it's more intelligent than any chemical agronomist who's ever come out to tell you what to do. That nature did not wait for human industry to come along to make her better. She wasn't waiting 4 billion years for humans to come along and show her how to do her work. This nature is insanely intelligent, and it is insanely abundant with energy specifically. And so if you find yourself exhausted and at the end of your rope, it's because you are trying to be your own energy source. And I did this for most of my life, exhausted as a doctor. And I was trained by the same chemical industry that you farmers are trained by. And I was trained that it was my ingenuity and my technology that needed to help, stave off disease and save lives. I nearly died multiple times in that journey of exhaustion and depletion that had happened within my system. And when I started to find my way back to nature within my medical practice, I started to flourish, and my patients started to flourish, and I started to see people heal rather than just palliate their disease. I saw real healing happening. And it wasn't coming from me, it was happening inside of the individual. It was happening from the nature within them. And that's where you can start as a farmer. Start with giving your land the opportunity to show you the path forward. And that takes stillness, which is very hard to do when you are desperate. And so it'll be the most courageous act of your life is to stop doing this stuff. Stop spraying, stop plowing, give the land rest, and start to trust there's a different pathway that nature will show you. The weeds are not against you. The weeds are the greatest resource for a farm to recover. And so regenerative farmers have retrained their mind to move from calling them weeds to calling them forbs. The forbs are the fundamental nutrient sources that will recover the soil systems, that will recover the flora and fauna, that will recover the nutrient density within the soil and food system that can come out of it. And so the weeds are there on purpose, and they are not against you. Nature has never been against you. The weeds are showing you the path forward, so let them be for one season, and they will return the nutrients that they were designed to pull back into nature. They'll pull the nitrogen out of the air, they'll pull magnesium and manganese and selenium out of the air and out of the deep soil system to turn that into a bioactive resource for your farm. So give the weeds a break and let them be for a moment, and start roller crimping instead of trying to get everything sterile and get those, perfectly plowed, clean, disked fields in the fall. Let those stay fallow. Let the biology stay there, and you can roller crimp your crop residues at the end of your harvest, and roll those down across the surface of the earth to create an armor rather than a bare, vulnerable earth. Create armor on top by the biology from this past growing season, and then seed drill your next crop in there, which might be a cover crop too. You can get your cover crops in there and let those come up. But then seed drill your monetary crops down into the through that barrier system and be in awe of what happens. Our farmers that trust nature for a moment will see a 3x improvement in their bottom line within 2 years. The main reason farmers are going out of business is not because they're not able to sell crops, it's because their cost of inputs are so high. And so the cost of inputs, their chemical fertilizers, the diesel fuel for driving around the farm, and then the herbicides and pesticides are creating the drain on the bank account that's putting farmers out of business. So when you stop driving, the diesel prices or cost goes down by 80%. When you stop spraying the herbicides, pesticides, and chemical fertilizers in there, your bottom line goes up immediately. And so your production will go down for the first 2 or 3 years while your soil systems are recovering. But your input cost goes down so radically, you're still making more money at the end of the first year. And by year 3, when that soil is really starting to do its massive recovery, you're now seeing an abundance that you couldn't have imagined. You are seeing more bushels per acre and all of this stuff in the years to come. And so it is a beautiful journey of trust, and that trust of the farm field below your feet is where it's going to begin. And simultaneous to that, I would say it's time to reach out. The problem that I had as a human being is the same problem I see in almost every farmer I've met, which is rugged individualism. We take it personally that we're not making it work, and we just try to work harder until we're suicidal. And farmers are suiciding at a higher rate than any other profession in the world, essentially. So physicians are right behind them. And so we are all killing ourselves in this rugged individualism that's just toxic in its own way. Our belief that it's our responsibility and it's our responsibility to fix things is part of the human disease. And if we're going to really get through this extinction event, we're going to have to solve for that too. And so start to reach out. And I know you can't reach out to your area farmers. Any farmer that makes the transition to regen right now is ostracized immediately by their community, to the point where they're not allowed to come to church, they're not allowed to sit at the bar, they're not allowed to be anywhere in the social settings of their farmers, because like that farmer with the T-shirt, I'm a farmer, I'm not trying to kill you. As soon as you make a switch to regen, everybody else feels judged. Of like, oh, you think that I'm poisoning people? Well, screw you, And so that's why they're ostracized, because there's this belief of judgment, when in fact they are just trying to save their own lives. Most regen farmers don't do this out of a sense of altruism at all. They do it out of a sense of, this is my last opportunity. I am going out of business. This is my last year. I have to do something different. And they are usually led by their wives. It's usually the women in the household that have the trust back to the nature that they can feel within their bodies better than the men, perhaps. And so it's the women among these communities that are really leading the charge. In the United States, 55% of regen farms are owned by a woman now. And so there's this deep remembrance within the feminine that is coming forward. And the good news is that each of us has a balanced amount of masculine and feminine energetically within each human body. And so we can all tap in to this feminine side of ourselves that understands nourishment, that understands that protection is only through nourishment. You can't protect something that's starving. And so we have to let go of the belief that the masculine is there to fix and protect everything. And we need to let the life force of the feminine start to boil through all of us. And to allow the feminine to really do her greatest work, the masculine has to become still and witness the feminine. The role of the masculine is to be witness to the beauty of everything. And by witnessing the beauty, we turn on this frequency of unconditional love. The role of the masculine, I believe, is to open the heart. The role of the feminine is to create nurture so that the concept of danger and protection is no longer needed. We need to stop warring against nature and warring against one another from this masculine belief that everything is broken and needs fixing and protection, one in which we stay still for a moment and we witness the beauty of life within our own children, within our own partners, within ourselves. And in witnessing the beauty, we open the heart again and we will become a different species.
Aho. Thank you, Zach. Thank you for your vision, your truth, your courage. I think you've reminded us that glyphosate's not just a chemical story. It's a human story. It's an ecological story. It's a spiritual story. And it's the invisible ingredient. At the heart of it is our relationship to life itself, in essence.
Well said. Well said. Well, honoring all of you, listening here, farmers especially, my heart goes out to you, and I see the beauty within you. I see the resilience and the genius within each of you that's out there problem solving at the edge of life. And just my prayers and love for each of you that are waking up every morning at 4:30 in the morning to go out there with the dawn and toil another day. Try to bring forth more light and more life. And so I'm hopeful that you can hold still for a moment and feel the wave of nature catch you up and carry you for a while and start to carry you and your families and your farms to a higher success than you can possibly imagine possible right now. So much love for all of you. Love to Blair and your whole family for the 2 years you've spent on the road, coming to the epicenter of the truth here on glyphosate and the farming industry as a whole, and ultimately to the spirit and beauty of farmers across Australia.
Thank you, brother. Blessings to you, the family, and to all of you that have been listening. Appreciate your time. If it's resonated with you, please share this conversation. There's so much more to come. We've got another 9 incredible guests that as we get to unpack this story for our time, this reconnection, this understanding where we're at and embracing the possibility we have in front of us. But we've got to do it together. It's going to come from us. The next, as the traditions say, the next Buddha will be the Sangha. It'll be us. Thank you, Zach. Much love. I look forward to seeing your head again sometime soon.
All right. Give my love to the mob out there, too. What a wonderful group. The Aboriginal culture out there is ready to resurrect or some memory of how we stay connected. So give my love to all of our brothers and sisters out there.
They will. They're well on the way. They're going to show us the way, right?
They've got the path for us.